What's up guys, today I'd love to tell you two simple rules that allow you to navigate through various openings, various middle game positions, and allow you to pick the right plan in all of those positions. For example, if we talk about the current position which arises from the French defense, the advanced variation which occurred in over 30 million games. So what is the white's plan here and what is black's plan here? We can already tell quite a lot about that just based on the pawn structure, because pawn structure is static, it doesn't change from move to move, and therefore we can compose a long-term plan. So here comes the first rule, is that you want to play on the side of the board where your pawn chain looks, which is in case of white would be the king side. Now, I know that a lot of players have heard about this, and you might too, but the issue is that I think that quite often people don't understand exactly how that can be applied in different positions. So I want to illustrate a whole lot of different openings and show you how this rule works, as well as the other one, which we'll talk about in a moment, okay? I've seen many times that after just this one quick lesson, like lots of my students had like significant improvement, and it was like an eye-opening experience for them. All right, so why do you want to play on the king side? Simply for the fact that you've got a lot more control over the space square. Thanks to this pawn on e5 as well, and just the overall fact that we control basically all these territory, and to some extent we even control the 6th rank, right? Because our pawn is there, our bishop is here, and quite often you also have the other bishop on d3, so I'll play some move for black just to illustrate. Quite often you also have this bishop right here, which means that you actually control like this entire side of the board. And black can't really do anything about that, which means that you can bring more and more pieces to that side of the board and develop your attack easily, and your opponent is kind of defenseless. The second key rule is that you should attack the base of your opponent's pawn chain. It's going to be easier to understand it looking at the position from the black perspective. So what is the black plan here? Now, imagine black trades here on d4. Now, what should black attack here? Imagine black tries to attack this pawn on e5, the head of the pawn chain. There is no way to capture it, right? Even if black tries to attack it, somehow the pawn is already defended. So if let's say black tries to attack it with his own pawn, then white can simply trade off and black still could never capture this pawn. That is why the correct plan is to attack the base of the pawn chain of white, in this case this pawn on d4, and black can bring more and more pieces to attack this pawn. They can reroute the knight from e7 to f5, and ultimately they can actually capture this pawn, getting the winning advantage. Here's an interesting question. What if black ever plays pawn to c4? What will their plan be after that? Well, it remains to be the same, to attack the base of the pawn chain of their opponent. Therefore, black will need to play b5 and b4 at some point in the future. Of course, I'm just talking about planning. Obviously, black will need to finalize their development at some point. And then they can trade off and they can start attacking all these weak pawns. They can bring their rook on the open file, and it's going to be active there. They can even go inside in the future, and that's going to be their middle game plan. Now we're going to see how this general understanding helps you in a huge variety of different positions. The position at first sight looks completely different, however, in reality it's the same pawn structure with reversed colors. Therefore, the plans will stay exactly the same. Black will attack on the king side, where their pawn chain looks, not like this, right? Because they have more space control there and they can easily bring more pieces, or they can push their pawn forward and attack the base of white's pawn chain with f5, f4, and then decide either to trade or to keep pushing forward. While I'll do the opposite thing on the queen side, right? They're going to play pawn b4, b5, and take there and develop their attack on the queen side. Here comes a completely different opening, the Carlsbad defense. One of the most popular ways for white to react here would be to push the pawn forward, the advanced variation. And guess what? Fundamentally, we have the same pawn structure. If black ever plays pawn e6, it's going to be the same central pawn structure as in the French defense, like we discussed previously. I mean, in this case, black often first brings the bishop out just to keep it active, but after that, we still end up with having this French defense pawn structure, and black's plan will be to put pressure down this pawn on d4, white will, on the other hand, try to develop their initiative on the king side. Whenever I publish a video about a Scandinavian defense, many of you guys are asking me in comments, okay Igor, it's clear what to do in the main line, but whenever my opponents push the pawn forward, I'm puzzled, I'm not sure what to do. Guess what? It is the same stuff, right? It's the same pawn structure. Eventually you're going to play e6 at some point, white will eventually play d4, and we'll get to this French defense pawn structure. You don't have to do it right away though, because you can actually make white's life harder here by going c5, so that it's not even that simple for them to play d4, and they have to maybe prepare it somehow. You can also bring the bishop out so that you don't lock it with your own pawn chain, and ultimately you get to the same position as we discussed before, but unlike the French defense, you've got this active bishop. Unlike the Caracan defense, you played c5 in one go without wasting time and playing c6 first, therefore you just have the excellent version of the French defense and your position is great. What's going to be your plan here? Well, you're going to look in the central pawn chain and play on the side of the board where this pawn chain looks, therefore on the queen side. Probably at some point you're going to trade here on d4 after white plays something. I'm not showing you the exact opening variations, I'm just saying in general, right? Then you're going to have the c file for your rook. You can bring your bishop, your queen out to b6, where it's going to pressure the base of the pawn chain, as well as, just in case, this pawn on b2, right? And you're going to develop your initiative on the queen side. Alright, moving on to the next pawn structure, known as the Carlsbad pawn structure, because it was popularized back in the day when it was played in a tournament in Carlsbad. You may notice that it actually is relatively similar to what we talked about so far. If I were to add the white pawn over here and the black pawn over here, we would have the French pawn structure, right? Therefore, overall, your plan remains to be the same. The white pawn chain looks towards the king side, and we're going to play there. Unlike the previous example, we have this square e5, which would be a really juicy square for your knight. Therefore, you'll probably likely end up putting your knight over there at some point. And because we have easy access to the king side, our pieces are looking towards there, right? So after we castle, for instance, and then at some point in the middle game, you're probably going to bring your queen over here. Plus, you have the semi-open e-file, which we didn't have earlier. And now you can also use the rook lift. And basically, your middle game plan will be something like this. How about you're playing black? Well, you will still attack the base of the pawn chain, therefore at some point you're going to push the pawn forward, trade over there, which will create these weaknesses in your opponent's position, and you can then target them with your queen. You can maybe bring your rook somewhere to this file and put more pressure, or you can put the rook to the b file and try to enter inside and put pressure. Also, white has this square c4, which is weak, and at some point maybe you're gonna bring your knight over there and put more pressure to your opponent's position, and that is what you want to play when you're black. Here's another extremely common pawn structure which usually arises from the King's Indian defense and many other openings just as well. By the way, I'm talking about these positions with closed pawn chains because they're usually the ones which are puzzling most of players, and maybe you don't feel exactly comfortable playing them because when the position is open it's pretty clear. I mean, you just go forward, try to attack your opponent. But in those closed positions where it's more about maneuvering and positional chess, that's more complicated. Alright, what are we going to do here? Now, here's a tricky question. Is your central pawn chain looking there or there? Right? It's not that easy to answer that question. But here's the solution. You gotta look at the most advanced pawn and try to evaluate whether it gives you more space on the queen side or king side. And because it is on the left side of the board, we can see that it gives you more space on the queen side. Therefore, we will kind of assume that our pawn chain looks this way, and we'll play on the queen side. Therefore, at some point, you're gonna play c5. I mean, you will probably need to prepare it, of course. Therefore, in the middle game, you will probably have your bishop over here, and then at some point you'll play b4, c5, maybe b4 first, and then c5 or c5 right away. You'll have your rook on the c-file so that you can operate there, and after that you'll have a choice whether to take or to push forward. I mean, in most cases, white actually takes here, because if you push, you keep the position completely locked, and then it might be difficult to attack. You kind of reach the dead end. Therefore, in most cases, white actually trades there, so we've got an open file, and you can then keep going forward and putting pressure against this pawn. Your rook is active along the c-file. You can try to even enter inside of your opponent's position with the rook, or you can jump with the knight over there and try to create some devastation. So that's going to be your middle game plan overall. Black, on the other hand, will apply the same logic. They'll figure out that their pawn chain looks this way, therefore they're going to attack on the king side. They'll play f5, and then they'll have a choice whether to take and try to attack this e4 pawn and use the f-file, or to push forward, and then in this case the base of the pawn chain will be this pawn on f3, and black will attack it with g5, g4, and then they'll bring more pieces to the king side and try to attack there. And that's how we have a lot of very complex and double-edged games in the King's Indian defense where both sides are trying to attack on each side of the board. Here's another version of the same pawn structure. As you may have noticed, we moved the pawn from c7 to c5, which is something that black can easily do. What are we going to do then? Well, for black, nothing really changes. We still assume that their pawn chain looks this way, even though there is no pawn on c7. It's just for the fact that in the center of the board, they've got a pawn, this pawn on e5, which is closer to the king side. It's on the right side of the board. Therefore, we assume that black has more space here, and black is going to utilize all the same ideas, right? So that's for black. How about white? White can't push this pawn forward anymore because it's blocked. Therefore, we'll need to play b4 in order to open up the position. We can't attack right away. We need to open the position first so that our pieces can get involved. And maybe we'll play a3 and b4 at some point in the middle game. If they trade, good for you. Now you have really beautiful pawn chain. You've got the line for your rook. This pawn can get pushed forward, and maybe you'll even end up having the passed pawn in the future. In most cases, however, black does not take on b4 because that really helps white. Therefore, after they go pawn b6, you then trade on c5, and they will have to somehow open up the position for your attack. Either they take with a b pawn, and then they'll have the v file, and you can enter and attack there. Or if, let's say, they recapture by this pawn, then temporarily the situation remains to be rather closed, but you still have some cool things. You've got this passed pawn, which is going to be a long-term problem for them. Yeah, you can now push this pawn forward and trade on b6, which will create this weakness, which you can then pressure and open up more files on the queen side. Plus, you still have this passer pawn, therefore a lot of opportunities for you to advance and gain something on the queen side. Alright, here's another interesting situation. We've got a similar position to the previous example, however, this pawn is on e7, not on e5. What does it change? Well, for black now, we can see that the central pawn chain looks towards the queen side, like this. Therefore, black will likely play there with a pawn to b5. They often fianchetto their kingside bishop so that it also puts pressure down here, and later on they can push b5 in the middle game and put their rook down there and start attacking there on the queen side. So this can be a nice plan for black. How about white? Should you still play on the queen side with the pawn to b4 and stuff like that? No, there is one major difference here. We say that you should play on the side of the board when the center is closed and you can't do anything there anymore. However, when the center is not closed, such as in this case, you should play in the center. Basically, playing the center is the strongest thing that you can do, just because center has the greatest influence on the chessboard overall. And therefore, in this case, you'd love to play pawn e5. I mean, you'll probably prepare it, you'll bring the knight over here, you'll bring the bishop, and you'll push e5 at some point. And after that, you'll decide whether to trade and operate along the e-file. Let's say you've got a rook over here, right? So you can trade and operate there, or you can lock the position with e6, where it's going to be harder for you to break through after that. But on the other hand, your opponent is completely locked there, and it's hard for them to move. Therefore, both options would be pretty good for you. Moving on to the next pawn structure, it's still quite interesting that we are operating just with two rules alone throughout this whole video. Even though we're talking about completely different looking positions, the rules are still the same. Now, in the current position, we're probably talking about the English opening where white played c4, e5, and then at some point, both players would probably play these moves as well. And so we'll have the position in the early middle game, which will be something like this, all right? So what's going to be our plan? Well, our pawn chain looks towards the queen side, therefore white is likely to play b4, b5, and attack there. So that's what white is going to do and expand on the queen side. Maybe even push the other pawn forward, who knows, right? And our bishop is doing a good job here, putting pressure there just as well. For black, basically it's the same stuff. The pawn chain looks down here, therefore black wants to expand on the king side. And in the middle game, probably they'll bring the knight over here, they can castle, they can bring the queen like this, assuming that white will probably have their king castled as well, and then they can play bishop h3, knight g4, and develop their attack that way. We've got the next position, but hopefully it's not new and you already understand what to do. In fact, it is the same position with reversed color. And it probably is the closed Sicilian. So after e4, c5, white often goes knight c3, knight c6, and at some point down the road, both sides will play d3 and d6, and we'll have this position. Therefore, plans will remain to be the same. White will play on the king side and will expand there in the future. They usually develop, and at some point will keep pushing pawns forward. Black will probably, oops, not like this. They'll probably move the pawn forward, bring the bishop right here, put this pawn forward, maybe the other pawn as well, maybe play the rook on b-file and try to operate there. That's what black is going to do. Now, having said that, of course, in all these positions, when white expands on the king side, they got to keep in mind that the center is not totally closed. Right? Unlike certain other examples where, let's say, this pawn were not on d6 but on d4 anymore, so we have something like this, then the central position is completely locked and there is nothing black can do. But since the pawns are still flexible for black, you gotta watch over the central breaks, because if you expand it so much on the king side, and at some point your opponent is gonna play here and trade, and after that, theoretically, like you're left with all these holes on the king side and all around, this can be bad for you. Therefore, white in these positions often try to just maintain the central control, making sure that black can't break there and destroy your position. But having said that, like overall, you wish to expand on the king side, you wish to castle there, you've got your pieces looking towards that way, you can bring more and more pieces there and develop your attack. Quick announcement, we are hiring a social media specialist who is going to work together with the Remote Chess Academy and me personally on social media. And this is a remote job, meaning that you work from home and it's full-time. If you think that you're suitable, you can find all the details in the description below the video. Or if you happen to know somebody who may be a good fit, share this information with them. And if they get hired, you'll get a referral bonus of $250.